The early years I don't really remember very much. I think that there was a time around 1967 or 68 when Joe and I read together. It could have been that it was at NYU. My recollection of this is somewhat vague. As I say, I think that our relationship really took off, our friendship, around that time or a little later, particularly when I visited Kenward Elmsley's house in Vermont, in Calais, Vermont, in the summer of 1968, and Joe and I did some collaborations, hands-on, meaning we were working on the same sheets in the same room at the same time. And we had a great time doing that. We worked on a comic strip called I Love You, de Kooning, and a couple of other things. And those really took off. And so I think did our relationship. I have a note that Joe sent to Ron Padgett about that collaboration that summer, where he said, "I haven't been oil painting since Bill arrived, but we have been collaborating on some cartoons, a dream cartoon, I think that was called My Dream of Life, and a de Kooning cartoon, also an advertisement for Vanish, in parentheses, cleans toilets. Collaborating on the spot is hard, like pulling teeth. There are sacrifices to be made, and really getting together only happens for a moment or so, if one is lucky. There is a lot of push and pull. Perhaps what is interesting about collaboration is simply the act of trying to collaborate, the tension of trying." I think Carter Radcliffe said something about the determined anonymity of Joe's work. And Joe himself, when he talked about making collages, I think he was giving somebody advice, maybe it was Ann Waldman or someone, talked about sort of letting the materials do what they want to do, which is a very good artist's and writer's ploy, and sort of keep yourself out of it to a certain extent, except to the extent that you're in a way the manager of this team, and directing it to a certain extent. And that breeds a certain impersonality in the work, and which I don't know if that's anonymous. I mean, of course, a Joe Brainard is recognizably a Joe Brainard anytime you see one, and so is his writing, recognizably so, both handwriting and what it says. He said something like, "It feels like everyone is writing, I remember." And I can well imagine that was the case, even though it's, his own personal recollections. And some of them would be details, particularities that would be available to anybody growing up in the time that he was growing up, or maybe the time and somewhat the circumstances, like Midwestern America in the 1940s and 50s. On the other hand, it's all sort of tinged with Joe's, remarkable powers of observation and recall and, empathy for these things. I remember in Vermont, of course, Joe was in those days still cultivating his tan, and even in the country wearing his customary white shirt, unless he was really cultivating his tan, in which case he took his white shirt and maybe everything else off. One thing about those summers in Vermont was Joe's liking for getting everybody to take their clothes off and be photographed, and maybe in some cases to draw them. But in my case, and I think with Ann Waldman too, and one or two other people. We were all photographed naked, walking down paths or just lying out on the grass. It was a lot of fun. We were young enough to still be proud of our nakedness. And I think Joe just wanted to see everybody naked, and so that was an excuse to do it. I don't think the photographs were became a sort of an afterthought. But I do remember one moment at night after dinner. I think that Jimmy Schuyler was visiting too, and maybe Ann Waldman was there at the same time. I tend to get the guest list a little confused between the two summers too. But I volunteered to wash the dishes one night, and speaking of photographs, there I was scrubbing away at the dishes and maybe even drying them or putting them in a drying mechanism. And I heard this voice behind me very softly call my name, and I turned about 3/4 looking over my shoulder, and Joe had a camera and snapped it at that very instant. I don't even remember if there was a flash, but it's a photograph that I always liked because I tend to be very self-conscious before the camera, and Joe got me wide-eyed and ready, so to speak, in this frame. And then I think he sent me a copy of the picture, which I've lost and always regretted losing because it's an aspect of myself that I like to see. And Joe had that way, I think, of bringing out such aspects in people. I don't think Joe was one bit naive. I think that he wanted to keep things simple and clear and unpretentious. The force of this, maybe not just this, but also the sort of condition that he arrived in or to in the early 70s, around 1971, came through to me rereading a letter that he'd written me. Ron Padgett sent me all the letters from Joe to me, and some of the ones from me to Joe. And there's one from 1971 responding to my letter, excitedly describing, I was excitedly describing to Joe the Barnett Newman show at the Museum of Modern Art. And Joe wrote me this furious letter about how Barnett Newman, he hates Barnett Newman. And he says, I hate Barnett Newman. He stands for everything I hate in art. And what he meant was the sort of self-seriousness that he felt Newman was about, which I don't feel at all. I don't think that that's quite true or fair. And I think that partly that rage had to do with Joe's condition at the time, which had to do with amphetamines, but which I'm sure other people have talked about, and other people who know about that more than I do. But when I quoted the letter to somebody, a mutual friend, that somebody said pills. But it also had to do with Joe's willingness to, or willfulness to, short circuit any kind of hyper serious view of art or anything else, and that he wanted to get to things in a kind of a simplified language, but not simple-minded, and not. One time we collaborated. I think it was Joe's idea. He laid out a whole bunch of materials that were all blue, and that was when he had a studio on 6th Avenue, around 1972 or 3, and I was visiting New York for a while from Bolinas, and we did this whole series of works. I think under the general heading, It's a Blue World, which was a quote from a film with Humphrey Bogart and and Elizabeth Scott. And Elizabeth Scott kept saying to Humphrey Bogart, "It's a blue world." And Humphrey Bogart kept getting hit over the head by probably gun handles or blackjacks or something. And then he finally says, "Every time I get hit over the head, there's this smell of night blooming jasmine." Finally, he puts one and one together and realizes that it's Elizabeth Scott's perfume, that night blooming jasmine. Anyway, I loved that movie, and so I connected Joe's blue fixings for our collages with that film. And I just remember that as a particularly pleasant afternoon, I think it was, making these works. And Joe was quiet, and then every once in a while he would laugh. He never, that I can recall, sort of said something like, "Oh, I like this very much," or "This is really good," or, you know, we just sort of kept going. And I think every once in a while we would sort of laugh together or smile together or prop something up as if to agree that, yeah, this one's a keeper. And I remember it much like that in working on the cartoons in the very sunlit studio in Vermont that he had. I just remember the sunlight pouring into this second floor room that Joe had commandeered as his studio. And our working, I think it was just one day, maybe more. You know, I was only, anytime I visited Vermont, it was just for maybe 2 or 3 days. And so we did these works rather quickly. Maybe he would say something like, having done, say, "I Love You" de Kooning, he would say, "Do you want to do some more?" And then we would. Joe did not talk a lot. That's why, you know, I'm sure the first time that I met him, and he's in the company of the ever verbal, ever garrulous Ted Berrigan, Joe probably didn't say a word. And I think that he probably in those early years anyway hung back a bit. But Joe was never, you know, a great talker. You know, he once said about his writing that he wanted to write the way he would talk if he could talk. Joe's place in the art world and literary history, I guess, because the Library of America book is about his writing, correct? It's not, there aren't going to be any images in it, am I right? Okay. Well, Joe's place in history, in a way, whether it's art history or literary history, reminds me a little bit of de Kooning saying about Marcel Duchamp, that one-man movement. But Joe wasn't even a movement. I mean, Joe was just one person. And the work really is unique. On the other hand, it's had this tremendous influence. I mean, it's been translated all over the world. I think it's been translated into Japanese. It had a major effect, I remember certainly, which is a classic, sort of the obvious classic among his writings, a major effect on the French writer Georges Perec, who did his own version of it for himself in French. And other people have, you know, sort of continued the form of I Remembered. I mean, I myself, I'm in the process right now of writing a book of memoirs, and I'm continually debating with myself, wrestling with myself over whether to just go ahead and do a sequence of I Remembers, or do I Remembers on particular topics or something, because it's such a, it opens so many windows, that method, that form, for one's memory, and it's a way of dispatching memories. yeah, so well. But he's an extraordinary, in every sense, extraordinary writer. And, it's very hard to find anybody close to him. There's a kind of, you say, well, simplicity, simplicity may look naive, but it may also be Mandarin. I mean, you have to look to people like writers like Stein, for example, to find something comparable. Like when she's really talking about something, explaining something to you, or narrating something, and yet she never sounds like Joe, nor Joe like Gertrude Stein, but it's clear and simple in a similar way. I can't think really of anybody else who's like that. But it seems to me that a nice big book of Joe's writing would be a kind of classic, reading his writings. And it's the sure test of great art when you never exhaust it. You always keep finding more things in it, more feeling in it, more pleasure in it, more details. There's a collaboration that Joe did with Frank O'Hara. One of the two collages that I have that they gave me, and this is one that says. I grew this mustache because my girlfriend has one, and I think mustaches are sexy. And so I've looked at that line over and over again. I never cease to marvel at that line, in fact. But then there are details in the collage, which I is in a bathroom upstairs, and I see it sometimes going in, standing up. It's at the back of the toilet. And I just keep noticing different things in it. The border along the edge of the sort of flashing green border along the edge of a collaged in naked male body with a fencing sword and épée next to him, or the kind of wrapping paper, I think it is, made of that has an image of very large flowers. I was struck the other day by how, because of those large flowers, even though the whole thing is probably only 9 by 12, it seems like a gigantic image. The scale of it is remarkable. So those things just keep coming. You pointed out something I hadn't noticed in the little gift book, and now I'll look harder at other images to see what I've missed. So that's it. That's something. The variousness that's in his work, and the sweetness and the intelligence, which are qualities that have staying power.